Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the West Melbourne City Council meeting to order on this February 1st, 2022. If you'd stand for the pledge, a moment of silent meditation, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Roll call of City Council, please.
Mayor Rose.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Young.
Here.
Councilmember Bentley.
Here.
Councilmember Ditmore.
Here.
Councilmember Bachelor.
Here.
Councilmember Frampus.
Here.
Councilmember McDowell.
Great. It's good to have everyone here tonight, and I welcome you and for attending this February 1st, 2022 meeting of the West Melbourne City Council. Members of the public are welcome to speak on any issue, whether it's on tonight's agenda or not. If you'd like to speak, please fill out a speaker card located right beside Chief Wiley and hand it to the city clerk, and you'll have 3 minutes to address City Council. Our first item is the public forum, where you have 3 minutes. Do we have any speaker cards? No. No. Thank you. Then we'll go to the consent agenda. We have the one item of our meeting of January 18th. Do we have a motion to pass that? Mr. Ditmore?
Mayor, I make a motion to pass the consent agenda.
Mr. Bentley?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. And one of the 3 action items, our first item is on the table, which means we tabled it last meeting, the employee wage increases. So if anybody wants to talk about that, we need to make a motion to take that off the table. Mr. Bentley?
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we adopt resolution 2022.
Well, we're not there. This is not on the table. We tabled it last meeting, so if we want to take it off the table.
I thought we tabled a time certain today.
But we tabled it to bring it back today. So do we want to take it off the table, yes or no?
I make a motion to take it off the table then.
Thank you. Ms. Young?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay.
Motion passes 6-1. So our first item is, Mr. Bentley was saying, resolution number 2022-02.
Yeah, that's my motion.
And that motion is?
Adopt resolution 2022-02, approving a memorandum of understanding with representatives of the Coastal Florida Police Benevolent Association.
Okay. Ms. Young?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Mr. Ditmore?
Thank you, Mayor. So after giving this a lot of thought, in theory, I support this resolution, or this resolution for the MOU to change the contract. But I don't understand why we are pressing to do this now when it's not going to take effect till July. So I have some concerns. I'll just lay these out real quick. Even in today's paper, the realtors, the Space Coast realtors, or maybe through the state, there was an article today where they released it, said that Brevard County has one of the top, top counties for having overinflated property values. And there was a concern about that throughout the state, but the Brevard County was like at one of the top because the housing market's so overinflated right now. So we're starting to see a little bit what we saw about 10, 15 years ago with some of that. So I did have a concern about that. But also, too, I think if we waited till May, I think, or maybe the 1st of June, we still could pass this, and then we'd have a better idea what the budget's going to look like. We'll have a better idea what the economy's looking like. And there's just really no reason to do this tonight. I just don't understand why we're like rushing to get this done for something that's in July. Nothing changes. I spoke with the city manager earlier today. There's no detriment here if we wait. There's nothing. So why shouldn't we wait? I think it'd be more prudent. And the other thing is, and I did talk to the city manager about this earlier too, but apparently we're not going to have any numbers back. I did have some concern that, you know, we're also looking at the fire department. We're also looking at doing some things, what those costs are going to be, what we might have to end up, you know, raising taxes at some point. But one thing we need to really pay attention to is that if we raise this and do this as a pay raise tonight, like right now, we're going to be stuck with that pay raise going forward. And there's no coming back from that. And we can't go back later and say, and you guys were here on council, and I've seen this for 30 years in public service, where ups and downs, up and down, where we're going to have layoffs one year, we're not going to have layoffs. You know, we're looking pay cuts, giving more money back. We can't, and I talked to the city attorney about this, we have to jump through hoops if we have to try to do a layoff because we don't have enough money one year. We have to jump through hoops if we try to cut any funding back from the police department because we're not allowed to. So I think we should just really take our time on this. And again, I support it in theory, but I'm concerned about if we go down that road right now, we're not going to be able to come back from that. And we're going to be stuck with that as we go forward. And I've seen all through my time as working for the city and working for the county when I first come out of the service, it was layoffs. We were threatened with layoffs every time we turned around because there wasn't enough money here, enough money there. So I just think if we waited, it would probably be a little bit better for us, and we'd have a really better idea what things are going to look like maybe in 5 or 6 months from now. And it doesn't change anything. So I guess my question is, you know, why are we have to do this tonight? Why can't we just wait? That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. My position is I just don't think this is good business to negotiate in the middle of a contract. I just don't think it's wise to do that. And for that and many other reasons, I can't support this. It just 4% is kind of an arbitrary number. Again, the highest paid obviously gets more than the lowest paid, but if you understand inflation at all, it affects the lowest paid people. So the more you make, the 4% is a higher number, obviously, and those people have a lot easier time than the lower paid. So again, I don't like opening up negotiations in the middle. That's why you have a contract. And I know that part of that discussion was also the 2% for the city workers, the non-represented workers. I know that's the next resolution, but these are kind of related. It doesn't feel right to pay one set of employees 4% and the other set 2%. Well, I guess we can talk about that. That just doesn't make sense. Mr. Frampus?
I also agree with you, Mayor. I think it's a bad practice for us to open up negotiations in the middle of a contract. I fully support that maybe at the end of the contract we may have to negotiate a higher pay rate, maybe because of inflation, but to do so in the middle of a contract just seems like a bad practice for us to get into. And I realized that the other 2% for the non-represented employees was kind of a compromise to make it fair to all the employees, and I support the fairness to everybody to do this. However, I just vehemently oppose opening it up in the middle of a contract. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add one other thing. I still feel the same way, and I agree with the speakers tonight. But I think what Mr. Ditmore said, that the recurring amount really affects us down the road. And that's what we all need to be looking at, inflation, and I know Mr. City Manager always said, let's not hire more people because that's a recurring cost, as this will be. So I would almost rather go a different direction, and maybe, I know later on in our agenda, we're giving $1,000 to each employee. I'd rather say, let's give everybody a one-time 5%, I'll make up a number, 5% bonus. Comes out of a fund, but it gives them a good kick in the pants. It gives them everybody, I'm talking about the whole city, gives everybody a good boost, gives everybody a good paycheck, and it's a one-time, non-recurring thing. So I kind of like something like that, 6%, whatever number you want to insert, and do that, and you can still put the caveat of what they're proposing for the Coastal Florida Police Benevolent Association as far as when that would 6-month leeway, if that's what it looks like. That's what he's trying to accomplish more than anything else. So that's my thought. Mr. Francis?
I think Mr. Bentley was in before me, but
Oh, your name's up here first.
I'll,
I just going with that.
I forgot to mention that I really believe this is also going to affect our budget and our taxpayers, and it's going to cause our rate to go up, if not, when we figure it out again next year or this year, that it's going to affect our taxpayers, and we also have to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ditmore.
Well, Mayor, I would probably be more inclined to support your idea of doing that as a one-time, and that would allow us to negotiate, and I'm sure that the police would extend the contract out for if we did offer something like that. And then if we're going to negotiate long-term, we will have a better picture at that time what we're looking at later down the road. The thing is, and one thing I forgot to bring up as well is when we do our rollbacks, like our last rollback, I want to say, to my mind, sticks in that we saved the city taxpayers about $200,000, if I recall correctly. Around that was what the rollback was worth. If we do this tonight, I think it's going to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Morgan, it's the cost for the annualized cost is around $200,000, I believe. Is that correct?
For both rezos, that's a pretty good estimate.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So you're really talking about what it would actually cost us in the long run is the equivalent of a rollback. So if later on we have to raise taxes, this would be an issue that would come up where we would say, gee, when we're raising taxes, we wouldn't have to raise them as much if we didn't do this, a couple of years ago. So I want to be able to point back to that. But I think it would be responsible if we did do something more on the lines of the bonus, and then just revisit the contract stuff when we have a better idea what the economy's doing, because then we can take a look at it a little bit closer. Maybe it's going to justify more money for them. Maybe it won't justify. Maybe we won't be able to based on our tax receipts. I don't know. But I think this bad rush of doing it tonight, I think, is one thing. But I think if we could give them something to help them, and we can afford to do that, that's fine. And then we can look at, when the contract's up to actually, or we do the extension or whatever, do the actual, we could look at raises based on what the real numbers are at the time. Because right now we're sort of kind of forecasting 6 months from now what we think it's going to be and what's going to happen even in 6 months from now. And I'll tell you, even a year ago, we didn't know what we were going to be doing. What's happening now, we were going to have this kind of inflation. No one knew that. And I don't think nobody saw that coming. But that's all I have. But I would support that, Mayor, if you want to, if they change that.
Mr. Bachelor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting the motion for the following reasons. The numbers that we have got in front of us actually are either the same or very similar to the originally proposed numbers that we received when we were under first negotiations. And if you remember, we actually met in the middle, and these numbers are up actually at the request that we had when we were doing the initial negotiations. And at the time, I supported the numbers as they were presented by the Benevolent Fund, Benevolent Association. So I'm sticking with my original thoughts on that. In terms of the cost of living, I think that regardless of inflation, even if interest rates do rise, it's still going to make it difficult for people to qualify for and keep mortgage payments. Rental properties are still going to go up in price. The cost of living is going to still increase, and therefore we need to keep up with that, or at least get ahead of it in this case. I think there's more to it than just affordability of housing for our own employees. It's also the mental well-being of our employees as well. It reduces stress in more than one way, more than just the affordability of housing, but the affordability of groceries and other such items that are particularly challenging for many of our particularly lower income employees at this time. And I think the best way to show appreciation to our own employees is through a salary increase, because it is a recurring cost. It is a recurring benefit to them. When we talk about the cost to taxpayers, we're talking about pennies, less than pennies on the dollar for doing this in the overall budget. And I think our public would support providing additional income to our police force, as the West Melbourne Police Department is so highly rated and well regarded within our community. I think that there is general support within our community for doing all we can to support our police force. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor, can we hear from Mr. Morgan?
We can. Do you have a question for him? Or you want him to read the report? No, I don't know what you're asking now.
Based on the comments that you've heard tonight, Mr. Morgan, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, we discussed this in shade session and then in open session, and this was the direction to bring this back. Obviously, there are some members of the council that won't be supporting the resolution 2022-02. Others sounds like will. I think it's a good strategic move on behalf of the city. I think our finances allow that without necessarily tying it to a not being able to roll back. The assessment roll is fixed as of January 1st, and so the notion that there could be a crash in values is a possibility for sure, but it wouldn't affect our upcoming year budget because the January 1 values will carry into next budget year. So I certainly understand everybody's forecast of the future. If we all had perfect vision, we probably wouldn't be here. We'd be in Wall Street making a lot more. But I think as a strategic matter, I think this is good for our employees, for our budget, and to recognize, as Councilmember Batcheldor said, that costs for our employees have risen unexpectedly. And as I said last time, I've been doing this 43 years. I've never made such a recommendation. Would hope that the council would never have to consider something like this again, because I understand what Councilmember Frampus is saying, and I've sort of lived with that for 43 years. But because this inflation came up out of nowhere, I think this is the right thing to do for our employees.
And how much money did we put in a rainy day fund last year, or whatever you want to call it, our reserves?
Yeah, we added a significant amount to that. It's still unaudited, but typically the city will not spend all of its budgeted appropriations. Typically, that's in the vicinity of $2 million. So when we look at our budget, I try to forecast revenues reasonably, but a little bit on the conservative side, and then all of our departments don't spend all of their appropriations. And so with respect to salaries, we know we have a significant amount of salary savings. I think there's 10 vacancies across the organization right now, and so it doesn't take too many months for a vacancy to free up enough budget authority to do this. So I'm strongly supporting of it, and that's my recommendation. I do understand and appreciate those council members that are more cautious in their approach to that, and that's certainly respected and appreciated, but it'd be my recommendation that the council adopt both resolutions.
And I think that's all the questions. Can I continue with my
Yeah.
Yeah. I know John had his light on. I didn't know if he was going.
Go ahead, you.
All right, so I'll go first. I think that the inflation that these folks, all of us have seen, is real, for at least the 7% that we went through up and through December of last year. And to do a single lump sum, which I think is one of the things that's being suggested, will help this year, but it does nothing to help them in future years. And yet, even if we had zero inflation going forward, they're still down that 7%. So this just really doesn't even make them whole. It just contributes toward that. And so I think it's the fair thing to do to make it something that's reoccurring, and it's just covering past that no one, like Mr. Morgan said, no one had any idea something this high was going to hit. I don't think it's happened in 40, I don't know, how many years? 30, 40 years or something. It's been a long time since Reagan was in, is when we had inflation, I think, this high at all. We put $2 million in savings last year. We're asking to spend $200K out of a $40 million budget. I don't think this is going to break any banks. I think it is going to help the employees, which is what we wanted to do. And so I'm standing behind what we proposed and asked Mr. Morgan to write and to come back with. I think the $200K spent, even though it's reoccurring every year, I get that. When we're putting on the order of millions into a rainy day fund or reserve fund, and we have more in that reserve fund than what we're required to have. Plus, if you look at, for example, our retirement fund, it's now fully funded. The city's doing well, and the people that help make that city do well are its employees. And so I think it's fair to say, you know, you guys take care of us, we're going to take care of you in this one-time exception. And as Mr. Morgan has said before, in all of his years as a city manager, he's never seen this before. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Ditmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Morgan, I guess I'm going to go back to my original question. Why tonight? Why couldn't we do this in May? Why is it so imperative that we do this now?
Yeah, the economic impact on the city's current year budget and future budget is exactly the same. And so I guess I would turn the question back around and say, what are you gaining by postponing the decision? And so that's how we sort of had the conversation was, I think it's ripe. I think it's time. But obviously, you know, I understand, you know, wanting to have more information. I guess being as close to the city's budget as I am, I have a lot of confidence that we can handle this. But I get trepidation, I get concern, and so I'm coming at it from a different perspective that I think we can pretty easily do this.
Well, if you're so confident, and the rest of a lot of the members up here are confident, then come May, this shouldn't be an issue. And then I would get behind it and support it 100%. So I don't understand why is there a push to do this tonight. And that really doesn't answer the question why it has to be done tonight. If my fears aren't realized and there's no issue, then there's no issue. And one other question I brought up last meeting, did we ever find out if any other city in the county or anywhere in Florida is doing this? Or are we the only ones? And is it everyone else doesn't care or they're not in a good enough financial situation? But is any other city that we know of, if you heard, doing this?
I don't know. I have not done that survey.
So it's, and we have the highest paid police department, this municipal police department, and I know the sheriff is trying to get a raise for his guys. Whether it happens or not, I don't know, but are we not the highest paid police department in the county? Are we not?
Yeah, our starting salary, as we discussed last time, is at or very near the top. It's as you get further in your tenure where that isn't. So the theory is if we're not behind, so we're not trying to catch up. Our people are not struggling because we're behind other agencies and we're not doing enough for them. So I don't get that. I understand the inflation portion, and again, I would support this if we waited a few more months to get a cleaner picture of things. And the comment that you made about, you know, the tax receipts and how we look at it, I'm well familiar how that works
as far as how tax receipts, how it catches up to a city. Usually when the economic downturn happens, usually the city doesn't catch up for another year or so. That's my experience. So they have a pretty good budget the year when everybody else is having a problem, and it's the following year they start having issues. So I've seen that plenty of times over the years. So I guess the two things I have is we're the highest paid. We're not hurting our people. We've never not been fair with them. And there's just no rush to this, but I don't understand why this has to be done. Is there an underlying reason, which there doesn't appear to be, that it has to be done tonight? And no one else is doing this in the county, or as far as we know, in the state. So either we're the only ones that apparently care, but, we have a contract, and I just don't understand why do we even have a contract if we're, it's what we negotiated. And then we're going to go outside that, and I would support that with a little bit more information, but it makes me hesitant. But I just, why even have contracts if we're not going to honor them? I mean, I think we have that duty to the public, to the people we represent. So, and like I said, so go ahead.
Ms. Young?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this shows a tremendous amount of support for our police officers. Yes, it is not negotiation time, and the amount that we give them now will be taken into consideration when the regular negotiation time comes. But they need, actually, I would like to see it, they need the money now. I would like them to have the money now. I don't know why we're waiting either, but that's not the question at the point. At this time, we may be the highest paid in the county. I don't look to other cities to see what they're doing, then, let's us go do that too. I don't mind setting the standards and having others see what West Melbourne is doing and model theirs after us. We look at what other cities do, but we really make our own decision. We don't need to do something because someone else did or not do it because no one else is doing it. We have the best police officers. We have the best police department. We have the best staff. We have the best city-run government. I love West Melbourne. I want to support and I want to show our staff, our city employees, that we do appreciate them. We want them to stay. It's hard enough recruiting officers. No one in this climate that we're in for police officers in towns, no one wants their husband or their son to be a police officer, and we have really, really good ones, and I want to keep them, and I want them to feel secure that they don't have to wait until contract time to be able to have a few more pennies in their pocket. I would like to give it to them right now, so I will be supporting this, and I hope others do as well.
Thank you. I agree with the last two speakers. I mean, we want to reward our people. Just piggybacking first on what the city manager said, yes, we already know what's happening next year, but I don't worry about next year or the year after. It is as the economy progresses, and sometimes good, sometimes bad, we got to keep the city going for years and years and years. That's why we only give for instance, the police officer a 2-year contract. We can't see that far ahead. That's what he's always said. Again, I'm going to go back to what I said before about the one-time bonus and piggyback on Ms. Young. If this was that critical, why in the heck are you waiting 6 months? I understand the behind the scenes of that, but again, I'd rather do a one-time bonus. Let's make it 6. Let's make it 7. Let's make it 8. One-time bonus, give it to them March 1st or whatever, and get it over with, give it across the board to everybody, and don't play favorites, and there we go. And then gives us, with the extension that we're talking about, the 6 months gives us time to look at some things. But if the time value of money is important, again, why are you waiting 6 months? So I just think a one-time bonus is the American Rescue Act money, some of that anyway. And like we said, we have a lot in savings. Some of that's just because we haven't spent it yet last year. We put it in there to spend this year, but that's another story. So that's where I'm at with this. All right. So we have a motion on the floor and a second to give the sworn non-represented, the represented police officers a 4% raise according to resolution number 2022-02. Can we roll call vote, please?
Okay, maker of the motion?
We have the motion from Mr. Bentley and the second from Ms. Young.
Okay. Councilmember Ditmore?
Now that would, you start with the Mr. Bentley first, then Ms.
Motion.
Yeah.
So Councilmember Bentley?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Young?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Councilmember Bentley? I'm sorry, excuse me, Councilmember Ditmore?
Nay.
Councilmember Bachelor? Aye. Councilmember Frampus?
Nay.
Councilmember McDowell? Mayor Rose?
Nay. Motion passes 4-3. All right. All right, our next item is this, kind of like the second part of this, adopt resolution number 2022-03, directing the city manager to provide a non-represented employees with a 2% cost of living wage effective July 1st, 2022. Mr. Bentley?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd make a motion that we adopt the resolution 2022-03, directing the city manager to provide non-represented employees with a supplemental 2% cost of living wage increase effective July 1st, 2022. Thank you, Mayor.
And I'll second that with an amendment.
I don't know what your amendment is. So.
That's why I'm going to tell you. That's why I'm here. But that's a great question. My amendment is instead of just 2%, give everybody 4% instead of the 2%. And the reason is when people go home, their spouses, we're going to say the police department got 4%, the rest of the city got 2%. I don't know how you're going to differentiate that. Also, the police chief, are we saying he's worth half of what the rest of the police department's worth? Because he's only going to get 2%. To me, he's a 4% kind of guy. So that's why I'm saying that. So do you accept the amendment?
I'd like to discuss it.
Sure.
I'm not accepting it yet, but
Okay.
we'll see. I thought the reasoning that we'd given before and that we sort of all talked about in the last meeting was that according to the table that Mr. Morgan provided us, the non-represented employees have already gotten 2%. And this was, I think even actually Mr. Frampus and I negotiated this a little bit to get to what was fair to these folks, and it was 2% to get them to the 4%, so that in actuality they will get 4%, but they've already got 2 of it. And that's what we talked about in the last meeting, and I think the number that we came up with was 2%. Because I think it was Mr. Frampus's idea to make it equal between the two groups
What's yours?
at that time. So I just want to hear why you guys don't think that's the case now. I want to understand your position.
Well, I didn't know that Mr. Morgan had a crystal ball way back in July when he was working on this
He did.
inflation.
That's why we're having to add 2
Yeah.
more to it.
Right, but that was part of their paycheck, and again, it wasn't across the board. You got the high, you got the low, and there's a bigger spread. I get that in those employees. 2% again, the custodian versus 2% for the department heads is apples and oranges. So I just think that to be fair,
Can we hear from Mr. Morgan what
well,
his thoughts are?
we certainly can, but to be fair, I just think that they should be the same number.
I ask a question first?
Yes, go ahead.
What was the percentage raise that the officers got in their contract? It was
Making like 7% over 2 years.
So, I mean, is that correct, Mr. Morgan? 1.5% for this year?
I'm not sure the question. It sounds like we have kind of 2 questions going at the same time, so
I'm trying to figure out, and Mr. Bentley's correct, when I suggested the fairness and the officers were getting the raise and the city staff wasn't, and inflation's the same. What I wasn't considering at the time was that the officers did get a raise, and it was based on their contract that's in effect now, and I think it was like a $1,500 raise, which equates to 1.5% or so at a base salary, starting base salary. Is that right?
No.
So
no?
the range for officers of the flat 1,500 For the highest paid lieutenant was 2.07%, and for the lowest paid officer was 3.3%. That's what $1,500 flat on January 1st represented.
Okay, so I guess we have to figure that percentage into our thought process when we're thinking about whether to give the city staff 2% or 4%.
Let me just read that one sentence he has in here. The wage increases for represented employees averaged 3.87 for 2020 and 3.11 for calendar year 2022, which is like 7% over 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Are you finished with?
No, I want to ask Mr. Morgan, where do you think that fair, I know this is what we asked you to put in, so I appreciate you doing that. What is the right fair number to make the city employees get the same inflation adjustment as the represented employees?
2.
Okay. And how do give us a little, can you give us a little more than
So
just the number?
if you look at the top of page 3 of your staff report, 6A4, you see the 4-part formula that created a average increase for employees on October 1st of 5.9%. The COLA portion was a fixed amount at 40 cents an hour and a 1.5% COLA. So for the majority of the employees, that created a greater than 2% COLA. But for some of the higher paid employees, you're slightly under 2% COLA because the fixed amount represented a greater percentage for the lower paid employees. So 2, I think, is pretty spot on for making the equivalency of the 4% COLA July 1st for the police officers that the council just approved. So I in terms of asking for equity and fairness, because the other employees already had that COLA, I think that's the right number.
Thank you.
It just seems like this whole formula, and let me read it because it's pretty convoluted in general sense, but I don't think anybody in Florida has this kind of thing. A 3-part cost of living adjustment, as he said, a 40 cent an hour for COLA for employees hired prior to October 1st, 2020, a 1.5% COLA for employees hired prior to January 1st, 2021, a 2 COLAs then rounded to the nearest 5 cents, a 1% increase for employees with annual salary under $45,000, a 1.5% increase for employees then below the midpoint of the salary range, Part 2 and 3 then rounded to the nearest 5 cents an hour, a maximum 2% increase based on employees' annual performance evaluation, then you round it to the nearest 5 cents an hour. I would love to be a fly on the wall when spouses are talking about why they got 2% versus 4%. It just wow. I mean, just wow. So, Mr. Francis?
Mr. Morgan, isn't it true, though, we're comparing apples to oranges? Because, I mean, you really can't give us a COLA increase on the police contract because it was a negotiated amount, correct? I mean, you're using a formula for one and a contract raise for another, so we're talking about apples and oranges, and whether, you know, fairness is an across-the-board percentage, which is the same, I believe.
So if you were to approve the 2%, if you look back at the last 18 months, going back from July 1 of 2022 for the police officers, their average increase is 6.8%. If you did the same thing for the employees with the 2%, their increase would be 8.8%. So that 2 is the difference between the two groups. Now, the employee group, you have to go back 21 months because they got their increase on October 1, and the police officers was January 1. So you're really looking at 2% more for the non-represented employees, but over a 3-month longer period. So I don't think you can do, the mayor was looking over a 24-month period in the back on the police agreement. But if you try to compare the going to the July 1st, 2022 date, I feel very confident that 2% is the correct equivalent.
Do we know what the average starting salary is for our city staff as opposed to the average starting salary of the police force? Because I'll venture to say that the police officer's average starting salary is a lot higher than.
Yeah, the police officer distribution, the represented distribution is a lot tighter distribution from lowest to highest. The non-represented is a longer distribution where there are significantly more higher and significantly more lower. It's a distribution curve that's not as tightly compacted. I have not calculated the average starting for the other employees. I have lots of other information here that might be helpful, but that's not one that I had calculated.
Is it fair to say that the majority of our starting employees that aren't under contract is significantly lower than the starting officer's salaries?
Well, I can tell you by number of classifications, and this is also, well, I guess number of employees. So we have of 90 non-represented employees, the bottom range, you get about half starting above, maybe a little less, and half below. I'd have to plot the distribution curve, but it's, again, we have sort of all the department heads, mid-managers, quite a few in the building department that are relatively high wage, planning, finance. It's a bigger spread, but I don't know. Comparing the mean and the median, I hadn't done that.
I think the reason the employees were hired is because they're non-represented and we gave them extra to catch up, where the police had unionized and they negotiated theirs, and so we're trying to catch up, and so that's the one thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair point. I think last time we talked about, you know, what's the look back period? Is it back to the evergreen class and comp study? Is it 10 years? And so depends on how far you do the look back period, but I think, Mayor, that's a pretty fair statement.
And I agree with Mr. Frampus. Comparing the police and regular employees is two different categories, two different modes. The police by statute get overtime, they get education money, they get they get cars taken home, they get different things, so it's hard to put them both in the same thing. So
but I think the council's been very aware of that, and I give the mayor and council a lot of credit over the years of doing your best to treat all employees equitably. And again, they are different jobs, different marketplaces, but I think if you take that very long-term look back, you see that we have pretty close to an equitable situation across the board. And I give the council a lot of credit for wanting to do that. Some cities don't try to do that, and this is a council that's respected all of our employees, whether they're represented or not.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
Sorry, Mayor, I keep turning my light off and on and can't decide whether I want to say anything or not.
Mr. McDowell, I was getting kind of blinded.
You said many of the things that I wanted to say, but I think to Mr. Frampus's comment, starting salary police officers or city employee, it depends on where they're starting. I mean, certainly if someone comes into finance or into HR, or if they're going to read the meters, their starting salary, their education levels are going to be different, so their starting salaries will be different. But an officer that comes in, if he's just coming in as a regular officer, he's not coming in at a higher rank. Well, then of course we start them higher because more is expected of them the first day their feet hit the ground. They've got to go through school. And also their job is a lot more risky than someone that's safe behind the counter, and we pay them according to that. And I think that we have, through the years past, we've been very careful to make sure that the pay that we are paying the staff and the police officers are fair. That's why we spent the money doing salary studies, and that's why we gave them raises to bring those up to where they needed to be so that compensation was fair across the county so that we could compete. Certainly we didn't want to be the highest, but we didn't want to be the lowest either. So I think that we've been fair all along, and I think that this is part of it. It's part of us being fair and part of us reaching out and wanting to keep the people that we have and show them that we value them. And this is how you show them, you pay them. That's my comment.
And a beginning police officer will now start out $47,000. If they have zero experience, if they have more experience, they'll make more beginning. Mr. Francis?
I wasn't suggesting that we're paying our officers too much. I was suggesting that we're talking about the struggle of the 7% inflation and it being the same across the board. My point was that some of our lower paid employees start out at $20,000. And the struggle's a lot greater for them than it is somebody starting at $47,000. So my point was, let's be equitable. We seem to want to be, we have the money, as Mr. Bentley said, and let's be equal across the board. That's all I was saying.
Thank you. Mr. McDowell?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to make sure I understand this correctly. This is a resolution that really came about from our last meeting as a way for internal equity to create parity or keep the employees whole, whatever that number happens to be or percent, however we went about it. In between that meeting and this meeting, I got convinced that the percentage is what I could support based on the calculation and how things shook out. I would say internal equity is always problematic no matter what organization it is. And I think you have to, that's why there's surveys, that's why you have HR, to review. And I would like to say life is fair, but there are jobs that pay more than other jobs. That's just the way life is. I find the argument interesting, with all due respect, Mayor, of pushing back on the percent, but now we're okay with it. Now we're going to push percent as a way of increasing, and it seems like contradictory to what the argument was on the last issue for increases. So I think life is difficult, and it's hard to do this anytime you deal with salaries, but I will support this.
Thank you. Mr. Bachelor.
Could we please clarify that your amended second is actually, that's what we're discussing? So are we actually having a discussion?
I did not accept his amendment.
Yeah, exactly. So
All right, so let's go ahead.
Yeah.
Are you not okay?
Accepting the amendment.
Okay, so we'll put it out to a vote then. So that
I'm voting on what Mr. Morgan wrote.
okay, no, that we're voting on the amendment. Do you accept the amendment or not? Okay, so the amendment is 4% for all non-represented employees, from the police chief down to the custodian or whoever, recreation worker, or whoever, everybody that's not represented by the union. Okay, so all those in favor of that motion, signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose?
Nay.
Can we just do the roll call, because I couldn't tell what the...
So for the amendment, sir, Mayor Rose?
that would,
It still starts
Okay.
with
You
nay.
made the amendment, did you not, sir?
okay, yeah, okay, I'll just say yes, of course, on mine.
Mr. Bentley?
Nay.
Deputy Mayor Yao?
Nay.
Councilmember Ditmore?
Nay.
Councilmember Bachelor?
Nay.
Councilmember Francis? Aye. Councilmember McDowell? Nay.
Okay. Motion fails 2-5. Okay. So right now we have a motion on the floor, and I withdraw my second. Of course, since it didn't pass. Mr. Bachelor?
Second the motion by Councilmember Bentley.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to give 2% across the board of non-represented employees. Mr. McDowell? No comment. No, okay. Mr. Ditmore then?
I'm just gonna, for the record, clarify my position, the same as before, that there was no rush on this, and that I don't see the necessity voting on something on February 1st for something July the 1st. It has to be done now. So with that, I'm not going to support any of this. I will say this, that, for years that this city's run a tight ship and was able to save money and do some really good things. I've just seen what appeared tonight, what appears to be a 180-degree flop on that. We're giving city employees bonuses. The police department's getting an additional bonus. They're getting 4% here, 2% here. It's like we're just giving the taxpayers' money away. And it's like we're looking for the excuse to do it. I'm just not buying into this whole thing. So it's not the values I signed up for. So I won't be supporting any of this.
Thank you. All right. So where are we with this?
Got to vote it. You got a
Okay.
second?
We do have all that, so. Yeah, Mr. Bachelor, okay. So go ahead with the roll call vote on this then, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor
Aye.
Councilmember Ditmore?
Nay.
Councilmember Francis? Aye. Councilmember McDowell? Aye. Mayor Rose?
Nay. Motion passes 5-2. Chief, you're still worth twice for what they're giving you, but. All right. All right. Our second item already is the COVID premium pay for city employees.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, as you recall, last spring, we had a budget workshop and we talked about possible uses of American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 funds that the city was reasonably anticipating. And while a lot of that discussion focused on our potable water and sanitary sewer system needs, one item that is eligible that the council desired was to consider premium pay for city employees to recognize service performed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And since then, the council approved a ARPA funding agreement with the Florida Division of Emergency Services, and the first tranche of ARPA funding was received by the city on October 13th. Since we've received those funds, I've considered how we might best administratively structure the council's expressed desire to consider paying employees a COVID-19 service premium pay, and wanted to call out some of the significant items that staff had considered. There is a limit on using ARPA funds for this, and I give a lot of thanks to our HR Director, Kimberly Gale, who looked at the final Treasury regulations that just came out last month, or I guess the month before now, to make sure that we have little risk of the Treasury clawing back funds at the end of the agreement period. And so roughly 71% of the funding can come from ARPA, but there are classifications that aren't considered under the Treasury regulations as providing essential services during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, again, for equity that we've discussed with the previous item, I'm recommending that all employees receive the exact same opportunity for this premium pay. And so for that 29% that we can't use ARPA funds for, we would use their home funds, primarily the general fund. And then our city attorney, Morris Richardson, was very good about making sure that our proposal not only considered the federal funding and its requirements, but also state law. And that prohibits the city from issuing any form of retroactive extra compensation. Therefore, this premium pay must be for services rendered going forward. And under state statute, it's called a bonus plan based upon work performance. And for that reason, and also to encourage employee retention, I'm recommending that the premium pay be made as a one-time payment to each employee successfully completing 6 months of continuous work during the pandemic for service that would start tomorrow through August 2nd, provided that the employees do not receive any disciplinary suspension or demotion during this time. And that gets into the work performance-based. It's not a real high bar, but that is something that would be considered as meeting the state statute. So I have a resolution that would provide one-time premium pay of $1,000 per employee for every city employee that completes 6 continuous months of work performed from February 2nd through August 2nd and not receiving disciplinary suspension or demotion, and amending the budget. The resolution, the attachment shows the whereases or the findings, as it were, for both meeting federal and state requirements. And then the attachment is the budget resolution. Again, you see that the ARPA fund would pay an estimated $113,000 and change, and the general fund $38,000, and the other funds around $10,000. So again, just in responding to that council request from the spring, I've put together a resolution for your consideration.
Well, thank you. Councilmember Francis.
Mr. Richardson, is it actually considered retroactive if we're just looking back in the past 6 months and seeing what their status was, as opposed to waiting 6 months and then looking back again? I mean, it seems like we're looking back regardless of how we set this up. I'm a little confused on the whole retroactive, because the bonus is not retroactive because we're giving it, you know, when they set this ARPA fund up, it was because of the performance of when this virus came out, and in the critical times is when we were asking people to work. I don't see it as critical now as it was when it first came out, and I'm a little confused on the whole retro aspect of it.
You're correct in describing the federal policy, and the prohibition against retro pay is not federal, that's state. And what the state does is preclude a retroactive bonus for work already performed. Probably wasn't intended for circumstances like this. It's intended for the sort of sweetheart deals that executives used to get on the way out the door, things like that. But nonetheless, we're caught up in it, and I've consulted with Florida League of Cities Council and many other attorneys who agree that we have to make the two dovetail. The definition of retroactive would be looking back now at the prior 6 months. We're making it prospective and forward-looking by saying any employees who meet the criteria of our performance-based bonus will receive the bonus at the end of a 6-month period. And the criteria are you remain employed for that 6 months and you don't receive significant disciplinary action during that 6 months. That way it perfectly satisfies the statutory criteria. And I agree with what you're saying, that the policy of ARPA may have applied more so to a time in the past, but under the Florida law, we can't apply it that way.
So if we just say, hey, we're going to give you a bonus and don't set any standards to it, then there is no retro looking back, is there?
Then it's not a performance-based bonus, which is a criteria of
Just
the
a bonus. Doesn't have to be performance-based, just a $1,000 bonus. Here you go.
But to meet the statutory criteria, one of the criteria is it has to be performance-based. Now, we've made that as lax as possible by saying have not received any, you don't receive any significant disciplinary action in that period going forward. But could we shorten the 6-month window to make it just a snapshot in time to sort of skirt the rules? I suppose. Would we be in technical compliance if we said instead of 6 months, it's a week or a day? Probably, but Part of this, though, it can be used as a retention incentive, which is a good thing, and that's part of the reason why the statute allows the forward-looking bonuses. I don't think there's any magic to the 6 months, but we can't look at a past period to do it.
So this is just applying to the non-essential people for the money that we're going to give out of the general fund and not necessarily ARPA money?
No,
Or?
it has to apply to, it applies to all of the above, regardless of what the funding source is.
Thank you.
Mr. McDowell?
Thank you, Mayor. Follow up on Councilmember Frampus's question, the then and now question. And do we have an idea as far as turnover? I mean, is this problematic? Is there a lot of outliers, a lot of turnover, or is it manageable? A lot of people that we employed today were here back then. That's what I guess I'm asking. Do we even know?
I think our employee pool, obviously we have some turnover, but a significant percentage of the employee pool is the same as it was before, aside from some recent hires. The good thing about this is anyone who works here as of today is going to be eligible, and as long as they stay and they're on reasonably good behavior, 6 months from now they'll receive the bonus. And I don't think council at this point wants to encourage anyone, because we do still have, certainly not to the extent as before, Mr. Frampus is right, but we still do have absenteeism associated with the virus. It is more difficult to fill positions throughout both public and private sector employment. So probably a good thing that it has some incentive for retention there. Someone doesn't if they walk out the door next week, they don't get it. If they stay and remain in good graces for 6 months, they get it. So that's a good aspect probably. But yes, in all likelihood, a significant portion of the people who receive it will be ones who put in the hard work, during the most difficult first year.
Thank you.
All right, so what's the wish of the council? Deputy Mayor Young?
I'll make a motion, please, to adopt the resolution number 2022-04, authorizing city manager to issue one-time premium pay of $1,000 per employee to city employees for work performed from February 2nd, 2022 through August 2nd, 2022, and not receiving disciplinary suspension or demotion during this time, and amending the adopted 2021-2022 budget.
Thank you. Mr. Frampus?
This is something I originally pushed for, so I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Bentley?
I have a question. This is all employees?
Yes.
So this one also, as a result of state law, anytime you enact a bonus program like this, all employees must be eligible. So we don't have the ability to exclude any employees.
All employees and police and...
Essential and non-essential, the only difference will be the funding source. And I will tell you now, there are jurisdictions out there, and I know some of you are probably thinking, well, I know this county did this or this city did that. I will tell you some were more serious about the application of the Florida statute. Some said there's no risk because nobody's going to enforce that. I advise you to follow the law. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment. I know a lot of cities that already gave the money and they're using it for their inflation, not waiting 6 months. But also a question, you said all employees, does that include our part-timers like our crossing guards?
Yes.
That's a yes for the record? Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I didn't know. Okay.
I'm trying to find out the same thing.
What about council, Mr. Richardson?
Council are not employees.
Good.
So it has
And
to
then
apply to employees.
I'll continue to support this then. Thank you.
But you'll notice in the last agenda item regarding a percentage increase,
Okay.
your badge lies. Mr. Morgan and I were excluded intentionally from the prior item. In this one, we have to be under the state law eligible for the bonus. If you'd like, I can commit a suspension offense in the final week, and you can suspend me. We'll call it a vacation, and then I won't get it. But the state statute says all employees.
And if an employee receives the money and decides, I didn't really I don't deserve this or want it, can they donate that back to the general fund?
They could, or to
Okay.
a good cause like Promise and Brevard, or any number of other good causes, certainly.
And they can do that directly without paying, because tax will be taken out of this, right?
Yeah, taxes have to come out of it on the front end.
All right.
Don't worry, Pat, you're still getting mileage.
All right, with that note, all those in favor of the motion on the floor, signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried 7-0. And our last item tonight is city manager selection process.
Yes, Mayor, Member City Council, we had a offsite last December of 2020, and then a series of budget workshops in the spring. And at that point, the council members expressed desire for a city manager succession plan, knowing that my planned retirement date is August 31st of this year. And so in approving the current year budget, you authorized a second assistant city manager position that I have filled with a possible city manager succession top of mind. And on September 17th, Assistant City Manager Tim Rohde started with West Melbourne, expressing his desire to be considered for possible appointment at the appropriate time. So with 7 months to the day on your incumbent city manager service prior to planned retirement, and I would really be honored to assist the council in any way I can to help you achieve an orderly and timely transition. I put this item on the agenda for you to consider a potential process on how you might go about appointing your next city manager. I'm suggesting a discrete two-part process. The first part for 2 months would be a more focused and in-depth consideration of Assistant City Manager Tim Rohde's candidacy, and this could be some more intentional, expanded observation of his work, scheduled one-on-one meetings explicitly concerning his candidacy and potential fit, potential interviews with our city attorney, department heads, and outside people from Brevard County who've had opportunity in a short amount of time, 4.5 months, to work with Mr. Rohde here, and then also the potential for council member calls to various people in Wisconsin who have had opportunity to work with him over a much more extended periods of time. I would suggest that you conclude that first discrete part of the process with a council meeting that's scheduled for April 5th, where you'd have the opportunity to discuss in open session your observations about Mr. Rohde. And that time you could consider potentially naming him next city manager or possibly determining to proceed to a recruitment of outside candidates. And if you choose to recruit for outside candidates, even if you were inclined to have Mr. Rohde be considered as part of that roster, I would be happy to assist you in managing that day-to-day aspects of such a recruitment. And I've suggested some potential dates that can change, but with a September 1st target start date for the manager in mind. And so it's not cast as the Ten Commandments. It's a little more meat on the bones of the succession plan, but I'm really here to assist the council in doing a process that you think best as you consider making this decision, probably by, I'm suggesting you should probably know this by middle July. Would be a real good target date for you to know who you've zeroed in on. I'd be happy to answer any questions and provide any assistance that you think might be helpful.
Mr. Ditmore?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a conversation with Mr. Morgan about this evening before council in depth. I support his recommendation on Mr. Rohde, and moving forward to continue his evaluation as his successor. And I believe the schedule that you have, Mr. Morgan, would be appropriate that you've laid out for us. And that, Mayor, I would make a motion that we follow the city manager's recommendation and the timeline and move forward as he's made recommendations to with Mr. Rohde at this time, and further evaluate this at, I believe you said April, Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, your first meeting in April would be sort of a key tract, one tract or the other, in order to provide sufficient time. If you choose to recruit, you really wouldn't want to wait any longer than that.
Mr. McDowell?
That's my motion. Thank you.
I'll second that.
I think 2 months is not enough time, but I'll let Mr. Bachelor go first.
That's what I was going to say. I am concerned that there is not a parallel process beginning today that considers external candidates, as this position is a senior management position, and with all due respect to Mr. Rohde, there, quite frankly, could be an external candidate that may exceed our expectations, and that candidate will need to have as much time as possible, particularly to overlap with, should an external candidate be hired, with the outgoing city manager. Therefore, I think waiting until April to begin recruitment of an external candidate, should that be deemed necessary, would be a far too compressed timeline. The external candidate, should we decide to go that route, would be in a very precarious position in terms of relocation, in terms of overlapping with the city manager. And so what I would like to see is a parallel process whereby the February 2nd, March 31st timeline laid out for assistant city manager is followed. However, we begin soliciting applications from external candidates in parallel with that beginning immediately. That is my recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Frampus?
I'm glad you beat me. I do agree with Mr. Bachelor. He said it a lot better than I could. I think a parallel process would be great. I do think Mr. Rohde has done a great job so far, and he definitely has an advantage by being here, and I like the process of setting up the meetings and talking with him along the way. But I do agree that we should give every candidate the same opportunity.
Just a couple thoughts. I think we need to get more information. I don't know his resume. I don't know if he even graduated college. I don't know any of that. He speaks pretty well, and everything is good what I see so far, but I know there's some qualifications for the city manager. I haven't seen that he meets or exceeds or any of those, so I think it would be good for the council to get his employment resumes or whatever, his personnel files, to see and what the qualifications are for city manager, so we can look at that to see if he meets those. I don't know if we require a master's degree, which I believe we do. I don't know if he has it. Probably does. Probably has a doctorate. We don't, the way he speaks. So, also, what education and background as far as courses, certified city manager, I don't know those kind of things, or if it's different in Florida versus the state where he's from. So those are the kind of things I want to get ahead of the game, and I know we can get those pretty fast. Also, if we're leaning towards him, or we're pretty well assured that we want our present candidate, I don't want to go through this show of let's go ahead and be nice and interview a bunch of people from different states and fly them in and do those kind of things if we know this is the candidate we want. So, again, 2 months, I don't know it. Maybe it's enough time. Maybe it's not. I don't know how he presents well. I don't know how he does with budget. I don't know how those kind of things. He seemed well liked and well respected, what we see so far. But we have different interactions than some of those other things. How is he on policy? What is his pros and cons? What does he like? What does he doesn't like? What does he agree with Mr. Morgan since he's his boss? And what does he think that he would change for the betterment of the city, if anything? So those kind of things, some hard questions, whether publicly or one-on-one, I think we all need to get to know him a little better. So also, Mr. Morgan, you have further down here, use a certain retired range riders and ICMA retired city managers. That's one way of doing it. I believe when we hired you, I believe we used a firm that specializes in hiring city managers.
Yes.
Okay. And you don't like that process? Yours seemed like a pretty good selection.
Well, I guess that's in the eyes of the beholder,
Yeah.
but I'm here and I'm willing to assist. If the council wanted to get some supplemental services from a headhunter, that would be something that would be good to discuss here. It wouldn't necessarily have to be full services. I think the recruiter that you used, I knew from California, did a lot of work in Florida. I knew I wanted to come to Florida to be close to my in-laws as they aged, and so the summer before, I took him out to lunch and introduced myself and gave him my resume and said I'd be happy to be in your stable. Told him I didn't think I'd be very good at a beach city, so please don't send me any beach cities. And I was very pleased that he sent me West Melbourne, and I am thankful for the council that selected me and the council that's followed. But if the council would like some supplemental recruiter services, that would be a good discussion to have tonight, or if you're not quite ready for that, at your next meeting. But
I don't think we're ready for that. But
if you think that's of value, and I don't necessarily disagree, I think I can do a lot. But if you wanted to have some supplemental services, I could probably talk to the recruiters that look at this area and see how we might fill in to get sort of their ready roster, which I think is sort of unknown when you just start advertising.
yeah, I mean, I know there's pros and cons. There's a cost, but they also do some background checks. They also do a lot of internet research. They do a lot of things, kind of weed out some people. And
Yeah, I guess my suggestion for the range riders, the retired city managers, is simply to look at the paper and screen out those which are patently unqualified. We did that with the police chief selection, and I think of the 100, there was a dozen or 15 that just plain didn't make it because they weren't even close to the minimum qualifications. So that would be the purpose of
the other
that.
way we have done it before is we get the packet of the 50 names and we all submit our top 5, and then those will rise to the top. But Mr. Morgan, we didn't hire you because we wanted you to retire in Florida. We didn't hire you because your mother-in-law lived here. We hired you, as I recall, because you were the best of the candidates, and it showed quickly, and obviously we made the right decision. So
Now I won't be able to get out of the room because my head's gotten so big. So
another thing I would think about adding to this is since you work at the pleasure of the council, but you really also represent all the citizens in West Melbourne, to maybe have a meet and greet where the citizens can come out and meet the potential candidates if there's more than one.
that's a great addition to this process. I think that should definitely be worked in.
That's all the thoughts I have. So do we need any action on this, or this is just for information? Oh, that's right. But we added some changes, so Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept this as written without any changes. Okay. Well, and some of us would like some changes, so I hate to vote no, but I would like some changes, so.
Well, it seems to me the key distinction between the motion and the second and what council members Bachelor and Frampa said is whether you would want to start a parallel process now or, and so it seems to me that's something that you probably want to discuss and come to a conclusion on, because if that is the desired, now means now, and we wouldn't want to lose that 2 months if that's the decision of the council.
Deputy Mayor Young.
I thought that's what we were talking about. We were talking about either voting yes or no on what we have now before us, but then in addition, aside, then to go ahead with what Mr. Bachelor suggested as well, regardless of the vote on this. I thought that was a separate item. Yes, two separate things.
That contradicts.
Yeah.
That contradicts what Mr. Morgan wrote in his thing. He says wait, and we're saying start it now. So it's, I mean, I said it's two different things, but it's under the same guideline. You know, we think it should be parallel now.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be, it would, I'm not clear, I guess.
Yeah. We'll let Mr. Bachelor phrase it eloquently.
Blah, 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 blah.
Well said.
I'm not entirely sure what the process would be. Would I be offering an amendment to the motion that we would then vote upon about whether that amendment is accepted to the motion, and then we would vote on the amended motion? Is that correct?
That sounds good.
If you're amending the motion, or are you just clarifying what it is that the motion is? But if you're actually amending the motion, then yeah, you described the process accurately.
Oh, wow, okay. Then I offer an amendment to the motion, which includes, in parallel, beginning the process of soliciting applications from external candidates.
But not bringing anybody in? Well, I don't know where that line gets drawn.
Can you speak in the mic, though, when you say that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the cost involved. I don't know where that line gets drawn. Are you going to bring people in to interview? Or are you saying, no, I just want to have resumes stacked up? I don't know what you're asking for there.
The process of putting together a
Qualification sheet?
an open solicitation for applications takes time. There is then a delay until the deadline of which the applications are received, including the letters and other application materials that may be necessary. There's then more screening time, et cetera, et cetera. It takes a lot longer to gather in a suitable sample of resumes for you to have a viable pool from which you can make an informed decision. In my former employer, I did this a lot, and it does take a long time. In fact, in terms of recruiting for the fall, we're actually already late. You would have started recruiting in the fall for an appointment beginning in the following fall. So to clarify, the amendment to the motion, is to begin the process of soliciting external candidates for the city manager position using a recommended process that the city manager will bring back to us at our next meeting.
Mr. Bentley,
Thank you, Mayor.
we have a second to that.
I want to ask a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Morgan, I'm not exactly quite sure if we're talking about actually hiring a company to do a search at this point or just collecting resumes. I think there's no cost if you gather resumes of potential candidates, but there might be a cost involved, maybe significant, if you hire a company like we've done before. And I'm not sure what we're doing in this.
Right, I would like to know that at the next
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, so my understanding from the amended motion would be you would want me to come back to your next council meeting that would have a parallel process where you could consider Mr. Rohde's candidacy while soliciting applications, and I will come up with a recommendation on how we might use a recruitment firm to fill in certain tasks that they're, again, I think the biggest value added is they know who's in the marketplace now and can make sure those applications land here. So to me, the highest value is not necessarily in the screening, which I think the council can do, even if you had, 30 or 40 to, whittle down on paper to say, okay, let's invite, 6 or 8, that look the best, a process for that. I think the value that for us, a recruiter might bring would be making sure the people on that roster actually apply.
Okay, and also the cost associated with that.
Yeah, but that's not the sort of the full service, right? So it's to me, in our circumstance, what would be probably most value added is sort of assuring ourselves of some quality candidates that might not otherwise sort of see our ad against all the other ads, and I just think that would be the part of the service that would perhaps be most valuable to us.
Mr. Bachelor, did you ever follow through with that?
Yeah, I think that is exactly what I would like to see. So that is the offered amendment to the motion, and also built into these timelines needs to be the contingency that the top candidate that you offer the position to does not accept that position, and therefore you will then set yourself back by weeks or months in recruiting another position. So we have to build into the timeline contingencies for many things, including having setbacks due to, the top candidate, whomever that may be, not actually accepting the position for whatever reason. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McDowell?
Thank you, Mayor. Just point of clarification. If you have a motion and a second and someone amends it, the person that's made the motion has to accept that amendment.
No.
I would beg, that's a Robert's, you cannot just change someone's motion.
You can make an amendment, and then the council votes on the amendment, and that would override the first.
Just like we did earlier, right?
Yeah, you can
Then-
vote on the amendment to the motion
And then you
first.
can do amendment when if the amendment passes.
Who made the initial motion?
Ditmore.
Do you accept the amendment, or is it a friendly amendment, or do you not?
I mean, I would accept it, so.
And do you accept it as the seconder, or do you want to withdraw your second, Mr. McDowell? Or
I withdraw.
maybe someone else can second it?
Ms. Young?
I'll second.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Ditmore, second from Deputy Mayor. Mr. Frampus?
So are we on the new motion or are we on the amendment?
Well, the new motion is the old, the amendment is the current motion on the floor. That's the only motion we
I
have.
have a question. Mr. Morgan, instead of delaying the process to the next council meeting, is there any way to start that parallel process now and not lose the time? I mean, are you familiar with the recruiting company? Or just seems like you wanted us to make a decision in April to tell Mr. Rohde whether we're going to go with him or not, and then start the process. Is there any way to start the process now? I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, clearly the council wants to start in parallel a recruitment, and so I can start to prepare a brochure, start, advertising. I think I'd want to come back to the council with some important things like a closing date and that kind of stuff. And in the meantime, I can be talking with a recruiting firm to see, what supplemental services they might offer. And again, in my mind, without having talked to them, you'd sort of have access to their roster of quality candidates and pointing them to us. One of the things that would be very helpful is I'll bring back to you a suggested listing of what I think you might consider as an ideal candidate, right? So typically that's part of a recruitment is if they had these dozen or 15 characteristics, that would be just perfect for West Melbourne. And so I think I know you all well enough and West Melbourne well enough to suggest something, but that might be worth a discussion at the next meeting such that the brochure sort of reflects your vision of an ideal candidate. Now, do candidates look at that? I mean, I looked at it when it came out from your headhunter and, okay, I think I hit 80% of what they want, and so that's probably a place I want to apply, but I don't know that it would necessarily discourage candidates if they thought they only hit 50, but it tells candidates a little bit about us in terms of what the council is looking for, and so I think I'd like to try to bring that to you next time to, before we actually go out, just so that the brochure kind of reflects, the council's vision of your
Understood.
next manager.
Does this motion give you that flexibility?
Yeah, I'll start and then try to bring, with this discussion, a more complete packet for you. And again, I'm not sure at this point that 2 weeks is going to, put us behind the 8 ball. So I think I have, if this motion passes, I think I have enough direction to bring you back something more definitive at your next meeting.
Thank you.
Just a couple thoughts that it's not imperative that we start today or tomorrow, because I think the good thing, we have 2 good assistant city managers that once Mr. Morgan retires, the budget will be done. We just have to vote on the budget, and a couple days after Mr. Morgan leaves, they can keep the ship going, and I feel very confident with that. So we don't have to worry if this does run a little late. We're in good shape. Second is, if we decide that Mr. Rohde is our candidate, because we're still assessing that, how can we have something built in that we put the brakes on outside and we're happy with the internal candidate, and so be it, it's just the way it is.
I think you do that with, again, just a thought, but with a closing date that sort of makes sense. I had a closing date, I think, of mid-May. If you brought that up to mid-April, you still have that ability to sort of call that off if you decide to go with Mr. Rohde. But in any event, I think that this is giving me some direction that I think I can come back at the next meeting and be helpful.
A lot of times I'll see we have a city has an internal candidate, whether it's city manager, other positions, and they're competing against outside people or vice versa. Sometimes some outside source might not apply if they know there's a strong internal candidate. So what are we risking by running that parallel?
We have to be honest with the outside candidates and let them know there's a strong internal candidate, but we also need to tell them it's not a sham recruitment, right? The worst thing is if, some council's not here, but, want to tell the public, hey, we looked all across the country and the best person was right here all along, when that was sort of their intention. And it's not only hard on the outside candidates because it takes a lot to make an application, especially if you're coming for an interview from across the country or something. And so it's fair to say we have a strong internal candidate, but that it's a truly open and the council isn't, it's not a sham recruitment. So if that's the council's approach, I think we would be honest with candidates and let them know there's a decent chance that the internal candidate could be appointed, but we would encourage you to apply because it's not a done deal. I mean, if that's the council's approach, I just think we have to be honest with applicants. If you're going to really get the best applicants, you have to tell them who we are and how we are and, what we're looking for.
Very good. All right. We have a motion on the floor from Mr. Ditmore, second from Deputy Mayor Young. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried 7-0. That concludes the action agenda. Next, City Council reports. Up first is Councilmember Stephen Frampus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say that 2 Saturdays ago, the Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Ivey, and his mounted posse came out to our community, and I was lucky enough to host that, and it was quite the show. He has a bunch of volunteers and brought out about 8 or 9 volunteer horse riders that they looked good up there, and our community appreciated it, and I'm thankful for the people that came out and supported us. Also, Councilman Ditmore and the mayor were there, and candidate Adams out here in the audience, she was also there, and I'm sure they can attest that it was very well put on. And thanks to the West Melbourne Police Department for also being there and supporting the effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Daniel Bachelor.
No report. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Councilmember John Ditmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two things, just sort of follow up for council on the Woodland Drive project. The city manager advised me that apparently we're going to take over some of that, to speed that project along a little bit.
Yeah, we're picking up the lining of the sewer that we have a contractor coming in anyway, and so the owner is going to pick up our cost of that, but that allows the owner to move more quickly to the storm drain work, and so we think that will be to help move it along, and we appreciate working with the owner. They're a little frustrated with where they are. They're putting up people who they've committed the units to up in hotels, and so time is marching on. So they're trying to get done as quickly as possible, and we're trying to help them to the extent that we can, and that helps the neighborhood as well. So I think again, this is where our Assistant City Manager Tim Rohde has done a very good job working with the owner and with our contractor to help speed things along, and so hopefully the neighborhood will benefit from that.
Thank you. The second thing I want to bring up is over the weekend we received updates at America's Best Value regarding the violent crime that took place there with the robbery and pistol whipping of a victim, and also an additional notification of an overdose. I did speak with the city attorney about that as well, and I'm a little skeptical as far as how things are going to play out with the changes that are going to take place over there, just based on my experience. So I will say that if there's more of the same, I don't think we should be held to a date certain of, I think, what were we, 90 days, Mr. Richardson? We looked at, was that what the recommendation was going out?
Actually, the recommendation was that the chief will report back quarterly, beginning at his next quarterly report, but that if circumstances warrant, obviously we can bring something back to council sooner than that. So that's already baked into the recommendation that council received at the last meeting, if that's necessary.
So if things continue on the path, if they're not getting any better, if they're getting if it's status quo or things pick up, I think Is there a certain trigger that's going to have the you bring something back to us? Is there something that we're looking that might trigger that, like additional calls or more than usual, or is it something we just have to kind of monitor and make and
It's
bring
a
it back?
judgment call. We can't put an arbitrary number on it because, as you saw before, analysis reveals, remember the great shock was the number of deaths there, which, although they're still troubling, when we actually did the analysis, right, we determined that more than half of those weren't what we really thought they were to begin with. So any of it's going to involve, there's no threshold number, nothing like that. It's going to involve an assessment of the numbers and what's going on there, coupled with what efforts the hotelier is making. As we discussed on the phone, decades of criminal activity there, hard to stop on a dime. It's going to be like a big ship. It turns slowly, if at all, and we'll see. And they may not, we all expressed healthy skepticism, I believe, right? But I don't think it would be fair to sort of call it after 2 weeks after our meeting and very shortly after they've implemented a lot of the changes. So I don't intend to come back to you based on what occurred last weekend. We talked about some of the, circumstances behind some of those events, but it's sort of like the Supreme Court defines obscenity. They know it when they see it. I'll know it when I see it if I want to bring it back early. And certainly council can contact me like you did and say, I think it's time if you disagree. But as we discussed, I might as well have a desk down in the parking lot of America's Best Value as much time as I've spent there, both prior to the last meeting, but also in the 2 weeks intervening. I'm on a regular hotline with Lieutenant Romano. I know, you see what's in the NCGs. I know what's going on there every day, if not every couple hours, involved in operations that are going on. So I have my finger on the pulse, and if you have faith in me, if that time comes, I'll bring it. But after, a unfortunate weekend where there were a couple of events that resulted in NCGs doesn't change anything from what was reported previously.
So are you using that a baseline from last year is to determine whether that ship's making a change in course? I mean, how are you looking at from what last year's activity are to this year's? How are you going to?
I have not yet because we haven't had enough time to have a statistically significant sample of whether anything's changed or not. Again, 2 weeks does not. We looked at a big picture last time of 3 years of data. So I think, again, barring some extraordinary change of circumstances, I think at least taking a snapshot of 3 months of data for our first report will give us a beginning to see how things are going. But I think just taking, a couple numbers, and they're numbers that haven't been reported that I could add to the pile too, but I don't think they give us any meaningful understanding of whether the situation is improving, staying status quo, or deteriorating there yet. I think we just need more time to assess.
Okay, so if we start seeing a significant increase in activity, then that would be something that we would be.
That would be a factor that I would consider in saying, hey, I want to bring this back to council, before the next report. And it's certainly the fact that we're having this discussion means that you're learning of these things. So, it's not that council is going to be kept in the dark for 3 months. You're going to be aware of significant events there.
Sure. Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Up next is Councilmember Pat Bentley.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'm on the same topic here. I've got a list of notes here, but I won't go through them all. We've had 2 instances, overdose and a battery. Kind of a rocky start to get off on after our last meeting, but I understand that, give it time, go through the process. The thing that was concerning to me is I asked the chief if how this person paid for the room, if they used cash, because we were told that they would not accept cash payments going forward. Is that true? It's a yes, no. No. Then I'll ask my next question.
Yes, they are not supposed to be accepting cash payments.
Right. So I think that was just a yes. That's true. So my understanding is they paid with a.
Let him answer.
Well, he gave me the answer. But I'm going to ask you. You're my next question. Thanks, Chief. So my understanding is they paid with a voucher given to them by some other place to help house the homeless. And I want to be sensitive to the homeless. but that's almost positioning people there that we said we were trying to get rid of a certain element. So I don't know how to politely, delicately say that, but it looks like they're giving out free tickets to stay at the very hotel where we said we were trying to rid some of those people. So I don't know how that works.
Okay, so a couple things I think is important to point out. This is sort of an anomaly. It was a very cold weekend. The Daily Bread booked 20 rooms. In addition to that, they were allowing people to come in that they normally wouldn't. There's a sign that says no cash, no vouchers, right in the lobby. However, we had this conversation with the owner, and he said he made the exception because of the weather. I said, well, you know, that's not what you said, that we weren't going to do this, and he regretted it, be honest with you, because there was people in there that, as you well know, things have happened. So I think it's a little unique when I say this. The weather played a role into this of who they normally would let in, and I want to make something really clear. We're monitoring this every day. We're pulling their register. We're looking to see how they're paying, and they be honest with you, are not following everything that we originally stated. They're using the excuse of the cold weather as making exceptions. We impressed upon them that this has to be consistent all the time, 365 days a year, and they swore to us that that's going to be the case.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I missed it.
That they're going to keep the no cash payments, no vouchers, and he's not going to go back to allowing a block of rooms being with one credit card from the Daily Bread. He's going to have to do it. It's going to have to be individuals coming in, paying with a credit card or a debit card.
Well, and that's new to me that was related to them. We need to be very careful about dictating terms like that. And personally, I can't speak for this council, but we're the kind of place that supports Promise and Brevard and organizations like that. We had freezing temperatures overnight in an emergency situation. That was not the only area hotel at which rooms were booked by Daily Bread and other organizations to meet that need in the community that we have. There was an article today in the paper about the latest homeless census, and the numbers are up there. And I don't want the city to have any responsibility or any accusations against the city that we're causing people to maybe die of exposure outside when they could be housed safely. There was one overdose of a homeless person there that on another night where it wasn't freezing and they weren't put up by Daily Bread in that hotel, probably would have gotten the call to a homeless camp too late to administer Narcan and save the person. So let's be careful before we try to say we're going to make a sweeping rule that, you know, on a freezing night we can't let you house homeless people when they're paid for.
That's exactly my point. I think this was a unique situation, but more importantly, we are just telling them that this is what you told council, this is what you told us you're going to do, and we're hoping you follow through with that.
Yeah, my point is I'm only trying to understand what the voucher system even was. I had not heard of that, and to me it sounded a lot like a cash kind of a deal. And I do get the cold, and I'm not trying to say, you know, there'll never be an exception, but I'm just trying to find out, you know, I see two issues come up, and then I hear the voucher system, and I didn't understand.
There are negative connotations associated with vouchers, largely in recent memory because FEMA purchasing large-scale vouchers and transplanting people from remote areas to places, and this is one where we received a large number at one point in time of FEMA relocated people under vouchers. What happened this weekend wasn't traditional vouchers. It was literally a charitable organization purchasing rooms to house people in so they wouldn't freeze on the street. And
do we know if are we allowed to know if they booked other rooms at other places as well?
We do know that, and they did. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I have a comment
Mr.
on
Ditmore has a comment.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Richard, I understand what you're saying, but I think it's kind of important what the chief has brought up an issue about. We're talking about this hotel that has problems when they accept vouchers and when they go outside of what the agreed terms were to try to change things. It's this hotel that's having problems. You know, we have numerous hotels throughout this community where I'm sure they would take vouchers if Daily Bread called them up. It's this hotel that has the problem. And I didn't call over to the county, and I don't know if the budget is in our jurisdiction. I know they did 20 or 30 rooms over there over the weekend. But I'd be willing to bet that they didn't have those problems that we had. So that we had 2 different incidents that took place over there. So it's this hotel that has problems. It's this hotel that shouldn't be taking these things because they can't manage it well enough to keep that element out. But the other hotels can. So I want to bring this hotel up to the standards of the other hotels. And if that can't happen, then we need to take that action. And they need to be held to the same accountability.
So this hotel agreed to certain terms, and again, we cannot dictate these terms to them. Now, we have told them these are things you can do to improve. Absent a court order, which we may have to get at some point down the road, we cannot dictate how they do business to them. But my understanding of the situation, and we keep using this word voucher, is that they complied with the terms because they did not accept a cash payment. They accepted a credit card payment for a block of rooms. Now we are talking to them and saying maybe that's not good practice. And again, I'm not going to tell them on a freezing night to turn anyone away, frankly, and I don't want to be any part of that, respectfully. But they did not do anything to violate the terms of my understanding. Am I incorrect, Chief?
Okay. I don't think that we're not asking to turn anybody away. If there's no other place for those folks to go, I would say that there's the issue. The problem is that's not the issue. There's other hotels that they can go to. It's the hotel management is not able to manage this properly.
I think it's likely because the Daily Bread cannot afford a block of rooms at the Hilton. But understandably, that hotel is a problem, and it has been a problem. No one's disputing that. And I'm saying overdoses, there are problems, and we're going to consider those. What I am also saying to you, though, is let us not try to give any direction to a hotel that they cannot house people on a freezing night when someone has paid for the rooms legitimately via credit card.
Well, what I'm saying is they offered the solution to us. Am I correct, Chief? We made some suggestions, but they agreed, oh, yes, this is what we want to do.
And they complied with all those. Which one did they violate?
Okay, well, I just heard that first of all, they're allowing the third party to go ahead and buy the rooms for them, period. And I understand the reason behind that because of the cold weather. I understand that. It's just this hotel is not the hotel they should be doing this at. So, I don't know what that's going to take to change that. This hotel knows if they accept block payments that they're going to bring these people in, that they understand they're not going to be able to manage the issues. That's the problem. Other hotels can. They can't. I'm not focusing on I'm focusing on the hotel being the problem. They just don't manage it well enough.
And let's stick to what the problem is. And the problem is the crime at the hotel. And forgive me for being upset about this, but let's focus on the criminal element there, and let's focus on the problem with the hotel, and let's not try to tell them what they can do in literally a matter of life and death in working with a charitable organization to house people on freezing night, because I do not like where that leads.
Okay, listen, I understand that, and that's not what I'm saying here. Okay. What I'm saying here is this hotel cannot manage their issues properly, and we've proven that. We've shown that. The record of the calls there have shown that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so.
Mr. Dimore, I think your point is taken. All right, let's continue. Councilmember Pat Bentley, anything else? Deputy Mayor Andrea Young.
Oh, sure. Pass it to me now. All right. Thank you very, very much. I certainly would have liked to gone to that thing that Mr. Frampus went to with the horses. That sounds like it was fun, but I missed that.
You were invited.
Yeah.
Well, I was in Orlando all day, so we had the MPOAC meetings, and the first meeting was at 8:30 in the morning, and I didn't get home until after 7. So I missed everything. I missed there was an event up in Titusville that fortunately Mr. McDowell was able to represent us because I wasn't able to go to that either. But the MPOAC is related to the TPO, so it's transportation related, and it was the first meeting of the year. So all of the different committees were formed. A lot of housekeeping work was done. I don't really have anything to report, anything transportation-wise, because it was, again, the first meeting of the year. Thursday is, again, a TPO symposium, which is out in Rockledge. So that's a symposium it was asked for registration, but I'm sure there's probably still room. If any of you wanted to sign up to go for the TPO symposium, you could. Friday, I'm back in Orlando again for MPO, but this is only MPO, not MPOAC, so I should have a report for you for that at our next meeting with what goes on there. But that's my report, is I've just been busy running around the county, or counties. Thank you.
Well, thank you for representing all of us. Councilmember Daniel McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor. And I will say that I attended the tourism, I don't know if it's a board, commission, committee, which Deputy Mayor Young was voted in as the vice chair. Again, congratulations. And it's a very informative session. And I will say thank you for making me aware of that. The other item that I did attend, or the event, was the Day of Remembrance at NASA, which was excellent. My first time for something of that sort. Very touching event. And the brother of one of the astronauts that died 55 years ago was there. And so it was just like it happened yesterday to this gentleman. Very touching event. Grissom, I think his name was Grissom. That's really it. I do have a question, though, about it seems like, and maybe this is just the way of the world, but a lot of legislative and maybe an inordinate amount of legislative things going on at the State House, and I can't seem to keep up with all the moving parts. And I know that there's one of us, and I forget who it is, that's our legislative liaison, and I don't know if the city attorney is the best suited, but I really would appreciate just getting kind of an update or, a shorter version than trying to get through some of those bills, just because there's so many. Is there any advice on that or from the mayor?
Usually early in the session, and I did this maybe month and a half, 2 months ago, I did a series of about 5 Friday memos where I summarized some of the bills as they existed then. Now things get changed. It's hard for me, in West Melbourne and dealing with West Melbourne issues to stay atop of everything in Tallahassee. So really your best resource is Florida League of Cities. And I do it occasionally, I sent it out not too long ago, and I'll send it to you again, a link where you can subscribe to Florida League of City legislative updates. They keep general summaries of all the bills that they see as affecting local government up on their website. But also they send out legislative action alerts, and I'd encourage you all to sign up for those. Occasionally, when there's a significant one, I go ahead and forward it to you anyway, and probably annoy a lot of you who are already subscribed, and then you're getting it, twice or maybe 10 times because other people I know are sending them to you as well. But if I think it's important enough, I do that as well. But I would encourage you, the League of Cities, they have full-time people on the ground in Tallahassee who it's their mission to not only stay on top of the legislation, but also from the perspective of local government, do a much better job than I possibly can here with my responsibilities. But I will continue to, update both usually near the beginning of a legislative session, and then usually in the aftermath, I push out a series of updates to council and significantly also to city staff, department heads, whose operations are affected and impacted by these. Okay, this is what the legislature's now actually done. What I'm maybe not as good about, or certainly not as effective as the League of Cities, is during the making of the sausage, letting you know, okay, this committee meeting's coming tomorrow, and get on the phone with your legislator if you're really interested in it. And that's something the League of Cities just does a phenomenal job with.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, just piggybacking on that, it's very difficult to follow the hundreds and hundreds of bills. Some pertain to us more than others, obviously, and I know City Manager Mark Ryan from Indian Harbor Beach went up there because the one he's been pushing is no smoking in the parks, and it said when the hearing is going to be. So a lot of those, the league will say oppose, neutral, or against, and especially when they're going to meet and talk about it is when we need to ask for our help to send a quick email so they check that box. But it's hard to follow all of them. It truly is. And when they're meeting, we need to watch them. That's for sure. A couple things. First of all, thank you, Mr. Frampus, for inviting all of us to your the Brevard County Sheriff's Mounted Patrol. That was kind of a neat thing. It was kind of an ugly, rainy day, but still you had a great crowd, and some of the Promise kids were out there because that was one of their things is riding horses and horse therapy. And so, and the sheriff always gives a little talk, and you know how the sheriff is. So gave out, yeah, I know it's hard to believe, and I gave out stuffed animals to all the kids. So yeah, it was a good affair, and nice seeing your community get together to support that. Last week, I gave a presentation to a Boy Scout troop. There were about a dozen or so, mostly boys, and just told them what City Council does and what we don't do, and they asked a lot of good questions overall, so very impressive. So, also last Saturday was the Viera Regional Park Mayor's Fitness Kickoff Walk. It was in the 30-degree range, I guess, and it was a nice walk. It was brisk, so the faster you walked, the faster you got through it, and it was a fairly good crowd. You couldn't tell who was on what team because everybody had their jackets and their gloves and mittens on, and but it was a good turnout, and I think there'll be a lot of good competition there. And my wife and I walked around the Field of Dreams 3 times around. The whole park is 2 miles, so that was enough that day in the chilly weather. So when I was over there, of course, you have the people being tested for COVID, and the lines are getting shorter, which is a good thing. I did talk to the person in charge, and he said, we're still testing like 800 people, and still like 30% or so are positive, so hopefully those numbers are going down. And as y'all got the report from the hospital that all the hospitals pretty much going down, but the only statistic I really like there that's meaningful to me is 99.2% of their inpatients with COVID have not been vaccinated. Whatever that means, 99.2 are unvaccinated that are inpatients there that in the COVID wing. And also, just piggybacking a little bit on America's Best Value Inn. Most of y'all saw, I'm sure, Sheriff Ivey is concerned about the one in Satellite Beach because he made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls there. So he moved his squad trailer out there. That's his command center, and had like 7 or 8 of his people that work that area, and that's where they're going to park, and they're going to look at everybody. And so if you go by there, just I think it's south of Pineda Causeway on A1A, and he's tired of it just like we are, and he says he's not going to take it anymore, but you know, he's out there in their face, so they got to go through their squad car to get in the parking lot. They're not going to block the public entrance, so if you get a chance, you can look at that. I think it's on Facebook or someplace that popped up, and always entertaining.
Are you suggesting we park our armored vehicle there?
Not a bad use of it. Anyway, just a quick question, Mr. City Manager. How many ODs, because we're not getting too many police reports anymore like we used to, but how many ODs do we have in the city besides the ones at this America's Best Value over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, you had the statistics through your council meeting last time, but I don't know that answer.
And that wasn't the question. What have we had in the last
In the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
I think Chief Wiley may know that. I don't know the answer.
I believe we only had 2 with that Narcan usage was provided.
2 additional to the hotel, or just?
I say 2 total. We haven't had a lot. You're getting the NCGs. I'm sending them all to you.
Okay.
And prior to that, I was sending it to Mr. Morgan, and he was forwarding things to you. But
Okay. Yeah, we appreciate those. It just kind of keeps us in the loop.
you got it. I'll make sure you guys get it as soon as I get it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And again, the next just walk for community is the Viera someplace in Viera is having a walk next Saturday morning for those that are in town. So if they want to participate in that. Every city is having walks different, not that they're a city, but different walks, different sponsors, different ways to go. And I think our city, if you look, is doing some walks in the afternoons and some in the after work kind of thing. So if you're able to join those, do so. Any questions for the city manager or city attorney?
I have a question for the city council. I got a call this afternoon from Jeff Keel with Promise and Brevard. They're getting a wrap for their the van for the Promise Treasures thrift store, and on the wrap they have corporate logos for a lot of their corporate sponsors. Jeff wanted to acknowledge that the city has been very supportive, given some support in kind, helped with the development of the place. Would love to put our logo on the van at no cost to the city. I told him that we have an ordinance that requires council approval for any use of our city logo. I don't see any legal problem with it. It's not an endorsement or doesn't suggest an affiliation. We would just be one of a number of sponsors if you're so inclined. But I told him it would be up to city council rather than bring it back to you as an action item at a future meeting. This is the type of item you could decide by consensus here tonight.
Sounds good. Mr. Frampus?
You need a motion on that, or?
I'd like one for the record. That's helpful, sure.
I'll make a motion that we allow Promise to include our logo on their vehicle wrap.
Thank you, Mr. Ditmore.
Second.
Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes today's meeting, 8:36.